Hey, what's up? Hello, everyone. Welcome into Fantasy Filmball, the show where we turn movies into sports and sports into something we don't talk about here. My name is Matt.
And my name is Arnaud, and today Matt and I are going to look into the shortlisted films from the specialized categories. We're also doing animation, even though that is not a shortlisted category, keeping the same theme, and maybe to try to tell the Academy to make a shortlist for animation, because maybe we should have all these on an equal playing field. Dylan is not here with us today, unfortunately, but he did send us his animation tier list. We each prepared a tier list. Dylan looked into and researched the animation category. He selected 15 films from the 31 films eligible. He ranked them in order of what is most likely to be nominated and win, I presume.
Let's start at the bottom, shall we? The category that Dylan has named Happy to Be Here, which includes Lord of the Rings, The War of the Rohirrim, the anime film Look Back, Mars Express, Transformers 1, and Piece by Piece. That's a solid bottom tier. Now, I will say I slightly object with Look Back and Mars Express being all the way down at the very bottom here because they did both land the Annie indie category nominations today. That was a big thing in their favor, but Piece by Piece, Transformers 1, War of the Rohirrim all belong down here after they all missed the Annie Studio Award.
What an extraordinary downfall for Lord of the Rings. It had an incredibly unceremonious end of its life, essentially through the lack of presence at the Annies that we just learned about. I do agree, Look Back is a potential spoiler. There has been a lot of passion towards that film. It is a film that's just about 60 minutes, so maybe that isn't in its favor, but you never know. For Mars Express, it's one of my favorite films in this bunch, but I don't see any passion for it within the industry, so I think it's fine here.
I'm not sure if I agree with the word downfall with War of the Rohirrim. Everyone had such high hopes. We were all early in the year being like, this is a major thing in the animation category. All it needed to do was just premiere for people to know it's actually not all that. I don't think anyone would have predicted it if we knew that months and months ago, but everyone had really high hopes for a Lord of the Rings animated film, and it just did not deliver.
Let's look at the next tier, which is called Possible BAFTA/PGA Plus Globes Shocker. We have Moana 2, The Glassworker, Despicable Me 4, the Ultraman Netflix movie, and Chicken for Linda. This category makes a lot of sense, except for The Glassworker. At this point, the fact that it missed the international shortlist for Pakistan is not a really good sign for it.
It also missed Annie Indy.
It missed Annie Indy as well. Ultraman makes sense to be here because it would be like the alternative film for Netflix. And then Chicken for Linda, that would be such a cute little nomination. I would love to have like a little shocker for Mars Express, but given that we are likely to have Flo and Memoir of a Snail as the indie animation representatives in the Animation 5, I'm already like satisfied with that, considering the Academy's track record. But if we had to have another one in there, would have been nice to have something like Chicken for Linda. Probably not going to happen, but it's nice that Dill mentioned it here.
So in the next tier, this is our locked films. We do have a pretty locked 5, but this category only has 3 right now, and that is Memoir of a Snail, Wallace and Gromit, Vengeance Most Foul, and Inside Out 2. All 3 definitely locked. Do any of them have much win equity? No, not any win equity whatsoever, but they are almost guaranteed to be there. They've shown up everywhere that they possibly can. This is one of the easiest years we maybe have ever had for this category.
Frankly, this is a bit of a boring race right now, and it would be nice to have like a potential like shocker somewhere down the line. It's unlikely to happen. The only thing I can maybe see happening, maybe Wallace and Gromit being switched out for something else, because it's a little bit unproven still. As we're recording, it hasn't yet come out on Netflix. You never know, maybe there could be a bit of a lack of reactions and the film isn't quite as strong as we imagine. I don't think that's the case, though. It's funny to me, though, that we really thought that Flo and Memoir of Snail were either going to have to duke it out for a slot or just kind of cancel each other out. But it's very clear in the past few weeks that Flo is just the unanimous indie animation, the clear favorite over Memoir of a Snail, which I'm perfectly happy with. Either way, both of them seem very likely for a nomination. They don't really have to be scared, in my opinion.
I do think Memoir of a Snail is a little bit on the edge right now. If there is one that misses, I don't think it's Wallace and Gromit. I think it would be Memoir of a Snail. But I trust the voters here enough. We've had enough cool nominations in the past. We've missed enough stuff like Moana 2 in the past that I don't see a huge risk of that happening. So I do think our five is locked. So let's go to the next tier, which is called the potential spoiler, meaning that Flo could win the award if things line up right for it.
And then right above, we have The Wild Robot as the winner. I think that's the default winner. That's the obvious winner. That's the film that I think from the moment it premiered at TIFF, we were all like, yeah, it's a done deal. It's done race. But Flo has been performing very well.
Incredibly well. They're tied at regional critics groups.
We can remember from last year where a lot of us assumed that Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse was the
Hmm.
default easy winner. Turned out that on nomination morning, it really was just nominated in animation, which showed perhaps a bit of a lack of passion. The thing that keeps me from taking a risk and saying, oh, what if this is a turning tide for animation and Flo can overtake the studio film and take this award, is that Flo is a new animation auteur. This is his second film, whereas The Boy and the Heron is Hayao Miyazaki. It is voting for a major name, an incredibly successful name, a legend, an auteur, one of the greatest directors living today. It's not the same as voting for a new Latvian voice who made a film in Blender for $4 million. I would love to see that kind of underdog narrative take shape, but it's not something I think is realistic. I think The Wild Robot will pretty easily take this one.
Just to counter you a little bit on that, I don't think The Boy and the Heron just won because Miyazaki. I think that there are genuinely changing tides. If it won just because it was Miyazaki's swan song, then why did The Wind Rises lose to Frozen in 2013? It was a pretty comparable race where The Wind Rises was exceptionally well reviewed for what everyone knew. It was the final film of Hayao Miyazaki, and it was up against a film that was a massive audience hit and very well reviewed.
I was saying that in relation to Flo and The Wild Robot. I'm not saying
Yes.
that The Boy and
No.
the Heron won only because it is a major auteur and a major name. I think a lot of last year's race, a big factor for not voting for Spider-Verse was because the trades were receiving a lot of stories about animations being worked over time. There were many reasons for people not to vote for that film and to vote for The Boy and the Heron instead. It's a particular situation. It's a rare situation. But I like that you're doing that counterpoint because it is an interesting thing. We've been seeing mostly Disney or Pixar films win, even if they're not that good. You were mentioning 2013. That year, Frozen won, which, in hindsight, in what world would we be giving an award to Frozen when The Wind Rises is there as well?
And the following year was Big Hero 6 beat The Tale of Princess Kaguya.
Where the Lego Movie wasn't even nominated. It would be nice to see that changing tide. I have not seen The Wild Robot yet, so maybe you can attest to that. I've heard good things about it. This doesn't feel to me like we're trying to beat like a film like Big Hero 6, for instance.
No.
Like The Wild Robot is well received. It is pretty unanimously loved. Flo is not like the alternate pick to something that a lot of people would be angry about winning.
This is a litmus test. If we see Flo take perhaps the Golden Globe, which is possible despite the fact that The Wild Robot has multiple nominations at the Golden Globes. It has 4 nominations. They did give Boy and the Heron the award last year, and that was one of the first indications that The Boy and the Heron might be something more. Now, granted, The Boy and the Heron did have a score nomination there, but if we were to see Flo take the Golden Globe, that could be a sign of its trajectory going forward. So to me, that's where I'm looking to decide this category. But it's very likely the easy choice of The Wild Robot. So let's move on to the documentary category. This is the category that I have taken. My tier list is not ranked exactly. The top 5 that I have here is not my top 5 for the Oscar because I think that there's a lot of categories that we have, a lot of different things that could happen. One of the biggest things that we have to keep in mind is this category is relentlessly unpredictable. Frequently, we get frontrunners that completely miss, and we get stuff like last year To Kill a Tiger, which had no precursors make the nominations. So if I were to give my actual predictions, it would partly be based on stats. It would partly be based on precursor nominations that films have got, and it would partly be based on vibes. But that's not how my tier list is going to go. We're going to start with the absolute bottom tier, which I've named Fuck This AI Garbage. And that is Eno, a generative documentary where every single time you watch it, the film is completely different because AI reorders the film, it re-edits it. How is someone going to vote for this in the category when you don't know if you're going to get a good edit of it or a bad one?
It's also just a strange way to organize screenings. It's an interesting experiment. It's an interesting thing to kind of play with. But as a film being submitted and now shortlisted for documentary, it's really odd because it's not a film with a given structure. Like, how do you know how the story was meant to be told in the first place? I don't hate the idea with a passion. I just don't know if it really belongs in this race.
As much as I can talk about not liking the use of AI in doing this, it is an interesting idea and it is fitting to the artist that they are profiling, someone who has always experimented with the cutting edge of technology, someone who was at the front end of the synthesizer wave of music. It makes sense for Eno, but I can't imagine it's very good. So the next category is called Archive Footage Plus No Precursors. Some context here. Archive footage documentaries don't perform well at the Oscars. I think back to stuff like Jane, Won't You Be My Neighbor? So many films over the years that have done exceptionally well at precursors, but are filled with archive footage and do not get the nomination. If we want to give a counterpoint and give credence to archive footage, we have seen as recently as 2022 Fire of Love get a nomination, as well as Attica, which blended talking heads with archive footage the year before. Crip Camp did get a nomination. Summer of Soul being an archive footage doc that won. 3 out of 4 years in the last 4 years, we have had an archival footage documentary, but it is still something to be cautious of, especially when we have archive footage and no precursors like Frida. Frida is not happening. I just watched it today, and not only is it archive footage, it is also exceptionally boring. It feels like something that you would walk into a room with it playing in a museum, and you'd stand there for about 2 or 3 minutes, and then you'd go, huh, and walk out of the room. It's not a very interesting presentation of Frida Kahlo. The archive footage, coupled with the fact that it has absolutely no precursor nominations, makes me confident in saying this has no chance.
Yeah, I agree.
Let's move on to the next tier then, which has been suspiciously missing from precursors, likely dead, aka the Beyond Utopia tier, where this film was early on predicted by almost everyone for the documentary category, and then kind of just didn't materialize. It's gotten 1 or 2 precursor nominations, but it has been missing all over the place. And despite having a very buzzy Sundance debut, this has not been a consistent through award season, and that is The Remarkable Life of Ibelin.
I completely agree. I think you
Yep.
gave the perfect description there.
It's a film that is creative, definitely one that caught a lot of buzz at Sundance, but through the year, that buzz has just failed to sustain itself, just like with Beyond Utopia last year. And I think likewise, this is one that we can count on missing on Oscar nomination morning. It might be tempting to keep it in, but I would recommend strongly do not put this into your nominations.
Absolutely. I would be more shocked to see it make it in than to see it miss, for sure.
So the next category is called Missing All Precursors, but the topic means it could get a nomination, aka the Tequila Tiger category. There's 4 films here that have not been performing well, and yet something about them just gives me a feeling. Maybe it wouldn't be the most surprising to see them pop up. So this category is the BB Files, Hollywoodgate, Queendom, and Union, all 4 of which I think have really interesting, impactful topics. I think one of these is going to get the slot, that last slot in the nominations, but it just depends on what Hollywood is most interested in talking about this year.
And honestly, I think you can roll a dice. It really will not necessarily make sense when you hear the title of the film that they select from those 4.
So to talk a little bit about them, the BB Files, this is a political expose film about Israeli leader Benjamin Netanyahu, and it's talking about his corruption, political scandals, and sort of everything contextualizing around what's happening in Gaza right now. It's a lot about corruption, and I do think that there's a possibility that Hollywood could find this more palatable for a nomination than something like No Other Land, which we'll talk about a little bit later. The next film on my list here, Hollywoodgate, is a film about the American pullout from Afghanistan, specifically looking at the Hollywood compound, which was a former CIA complex. So it's a bit of a war film. It's looking at what has happened since the Taliban have re-entered power in Afghanistan. Then we've got Queendom, which is a film set in Russia, and it's about an LGBTQ activist who, despite being persecuted by the Russian government, has continued to dress up in elaborate costumes and perform stage shows as an act of protest. And the last one here is Union, which is about the formation of the first Amazon labor union under the direction of Chris Smalls. To me, this one feels most likely in this category for a nomination, and I will be predicting it for a nomination because of the topic, because I feel like strikes, I feel like unions are a very current, very relevant relevant topic within the film industry. We've just come off of 2 years of strikes, all of which affected last year's Oscar race very heavily. It's still on people's minds. I think workers' rights are something that are going to speak to voters right now.
I'm worried about the actors having, finished their strike almost a year ago right now, and that it's not as much on their mind, actually. Not that, they need to have it on their mind to recognize the brilliance of the film. I would also say that Queendom gives me vibes of Apollonia from last year, which was a film that was shortlisted, also about a daring artist who was kind of in a certain counterculture. Artist documentaries are not always the ones that get nominations. So that's the one from those four, actually, I think would be least likely.
I would agree. I just think that we can never underestimate the hate boner of Hollywood towards Russia. It's something that no one is going to disagree with. There may be a more effective film on that topic, which we'll talk about a little bit later. The Academy will never pass up a chance to say, hey, Putin, go fuck yourself. So the next category that I have here, and you are likely going to disagree with me on this, but I'll plead my case. I'm calling this category will win if nominated, but will not be nominated. And that is one film, Will and Harper, the Netflix documentary about Will Ferrell traveling across the country with his good friend Harper Steele as the two of them hang out, make jokes all the way along the country. It's a feel-good road trip movie with themes of trans acceptance.
Matt, I hate that you're right.
Well,
I,
you watched it today.
I'm missing 20 minutes still. I'm almost done with.
Okay.
Frankly, I think I would have turned it off after 30 minutes, but
It's not your
that's
type of movie.
I don't dislike it. It's just that I felt like I'd gotten everything from it. The filmmaking isn't particularly inspired. It really is, like, frankly, it is a documentary for people who don't like or appreciate documentaries, which is
Yes.
one of the reasons why, if it is nominated by the documentary branch and is now open to all Academy voters, it is something that will be accessible to most Academy voters. On top of that, it's filled with stars, cameos from a lot of SNL members, and that has a certain righteousness to it. But I think you're right that the film is probably going to just miss the nomination. Maybe it will get a song nomination as a consolation prize. I don't know. As much as I would be disappointed to see it nominated and win, I think that you're right that this is a major spoiler in the category.
Well, the thing about it is we can count on the documentary category to gatekeep. They are documentary filmmakers. They hold their art to a very high esteem that most people do not hold documentaries to. It's very easy to see something where it's just Will Ferrell making jokes in the passenger seat of a car. It's easy to give that a win, but the documentary branch stops it. The same way that in short films, almost every year, there's a film shortlisted that has a big name actor in it. Usually, those films are not nominated because they are gate kept out. The branch knows if they are nominated, they will win. And when they are nominated, they do win. For example, The Long Goodbye with Riz Ahmed, or last year, the Wes Anderson short film. When you see a big name in the short film category, it is winning. There is nothing else that can take it down. And Will and Harper is the same. Now, the question that I have is this more Won't You Be My Neighbor, or is this more My Octopus Teacher? The film that, by all means, should not have gotten a nomination. That is a film that feels, quote unquote, lower than what the documentary branch typically does. To me, Will and Harper is one, if it's nominated, it is My Octopus Teacher, especially because what we're going to see in January, February, around the time when Oscar voting is opening up, Trump will get into office. He will immediately put in place some anti-trans laws, and those anti-trans laws will cause a major uproar. And if Will and Harper is nominated, then it is a very easy political win supporting trans people.
I remember the year of My Octopus Teacher and how there was so much genuine love. People were really strongly reacting to it, and I couldn't understand it. I couldn't fathom it. That's not a reaction I had, but I remember that really tangibly. And I don't know if that is as present for Will and Harper. I'm not feeling the same kind of like overwhelming love.
One thing very strongly against this one, it does not have a PGA nomination, which is really weird. The only film on the shortlist that has a PGA nomination is Porcelain War. Now, that said, Porcelain War, not in my next tier, because my next tier, just a step down, is doing exceptionally well with precursors, but is archive footage. And we do have to keep that in consideration. And that is Soundtrack to a Coup d'etat, which is performing so well. It's getting basically every nomination it needs, but we do have to keep in mind it is a 2.5 hour long movie about jazz music and politics, and it's all archive footage. It's not feeling like a nominee to me, but it really is getting in everywhere that it needs to.
And archive footage, a lot of still pictures too. This is a somewhat austere film from what I can tell. Like this is a film that will appeal to the kind of documentary enjoyers that like Wang Bing documentaries. If you know who Wang Bing is, then you're probably that kind of person. If you don't, that's okay. I would love to see that kind of surprise. Right now, my head is telling me keep this out.
So let's move to the next category. This is the second from the top for me, and it's called A Few Key Precursor Misses, but Still Incredibly Strong. That is Black Box Diaries, Porcelain War, Dahomey, and Daughters. They've gotten a lot of what they need to, but have missed a few key strategic places. Things that make me feel like maybe they are a little bit weaker than we might give them credit for. For example, Black Box Diaries missed the Critics' Choice Award, and it's a film that really should have gotten that nomination. And it's missed a few other key places. This is a Japanese film about the Japanese Me Too movement following a journalist who uncovered mass sexual harassment. So that one has performed quite well, but just missed enough places to make me a little bit worried about it. Porcelain War, on the other hand, has missed almost everything, but it is the only film of the entire shortlist, as I mentioned, that it got the PGA nomination. And the Producers Guild Award is incredibly important because there is a similar voting base when we get to the general field. Oftentimes what we see win the Producers Guild will end up winning the Oscar. That won't be the case this year, but we do have to keep in consideration Porcelain War is also the one Ukraine doc that we have this year, being about a group of artists who are a small group of rebel fighters against the Russian invading forces. It won the Grand Jury Prize in the US documentary category at Sundance, which is often quite a good precursor. I'm not as confident in this one getting a nomination, even though we've had a couple of years of Ukraine docs performing very well in the category. Dahomey has performed basically everywhere that it needs to. A few key misses. Missed the Critics' Choice Award, it missed the PGA, but it has gotten basically everything else it needs. But the thing about Dahomey is it is a 60-minute long, very, very short film, and it's very simple. It's basically just a museum which is shipping off stolen artifacts and sending them back to Benin. And then the last 20, 25 minutes of the film is a community gathering where people are talking about the merits of bringing these items back or leaving them where they are. It's a very simple film, very straightforward, but also very artsy and inaccessible. It doesn't feel right for a nomination, despite the fact that it has performed very well with precursors. And then Daughters is here as well, and this is another one that's made it basically everywhere, but it has missed a few key nominations, which make me worried, especially for an American film and a film that going into the season we thought was the de facto frontrunner. It's starting to look like this has vulnerabilities in the same way that something like The Rescue did a few years ago. Back in January, February, March, when we first talked about documentaries, I felt absolutely certain that this was going to be our winner at the end of the year.
I thought you expressed a little bit of doubt. Maybe it was because you didn't absolutely love the film, but
Well, that was after I saw it. I think I did a quick little video after Sundance talking about how Daughters had done so well at the festival, winning the overall audience award, that it made me confident that was going to win.
didn't win any jury prizes though. And maybe
Yes.
you could argue that could be a bit of a sign of weakness. But the worst case scenario for Daughters is that it becomes like a Netflix documentary from a few years ago, Descendant, where we were kind of assuming, oh, it's just in there. Like this is one of the highlights from Sundance. And then it just kind of like gotten worse and worse reception. Didn't quite translate to a nomination. It was probably just under the five. That's the worst case scenario for Daughters. I don't think that'll happen. I think it will be nominated at the end of the day. All these films belong in this tier. If I had to pick two or something from that tier, it would be Daughters and Porcelain War, I think. Since, the eruption of the war in Ukraine in 2022, we have had consistently a film on that topic be nominated and win so far. We've shifted our focus a little bit this year in global politics. We're not as focused on that conflict for a film like that to have to win, but I think it's very much in the cards and likely for that conflict to be represented in a nomination, and it just makes sense for it to be this film and not Queendom, for example.
We can't deny as well that it is a topic that every single person agrees on. I don't think there would be a single Academy voter who would not agree with an anti-Putin sentiment. So it does make it very, very easy for this to be a consensus nomination. And it is a very well done film about not just war, but what wars are fought for. It is about Ukrainian culture, Ukrainian art, and what these soldiers are really fighting to maintain. Let's move to the next category and final category, which is called As Locked as Possible for a nomination. I do say as locked as possible because it's the documentary category. There is no such thing as a lock. Anything can happen here. We will not be certain of anything until the nominations are read. And so the two films in this category are Sugarcane and at the very top, No Other Land, which I do not see a single possibility of this missing. But again, I can't say 100% because it is the documentary category.
I've been watching you talk about the documentary category in the past few years, and I remember distinctly you saying, when I got out of 20 Days in Mariupol, I knew that was going to win. I had that same feeling when I got out of No Other Land. I was like, there is no way that film does not win. And I realize this is not as unanimous in the Western kind of culture sphere, I guess. People are not completely aligned with the Palestinians on this issue, unfortunately. But I have to assume certainly more than half of Hollywood people or of artists, people who are going to vote at the Academy, are more in line and empathetic towards, or at least open to being empathetic to the Palestinian cause. Frankly, watching this film, watching the injustices, the inhumane acts of the Israeli soldiers within these communities, destroying their homes. This is a film that is enraging, frankly. And I don't think it's like an incredible film the way some people are hailing it, but I think ultimately it is incredibly motivating. This is a shoo-in for a win, and the film just needs a majority. So even if, let's say, 40% of people are not aligned with the cause of the film, if the film can still overwhelmingly rally the other 60%, then it just wins. Or even 40%, and then, you know, the other 20% are like sprinkled in through for other films. But this is the film that has been performing the best so far in nominations and in wins. It's been sweeping a lot of documentary categories so far.
I'm going to come in with the counterpoint here. The documentary branch is by far the most progressive. Documentary filmmakers are always at the front edge of any social movement. They are always the ones who are most open-minded to change, to progressive politics. These are the voters who always put forward films that maybe challenge the dominant political view. That is not the overwhelming majority of the Academy. I think you're being very, very generous by saying that maybe 40% of the Academy does not support the Palestinian cause. We are talking about Hollywood. We are talking about the United States, which overall is very conservative. Even a lot of liberals do not side with the Palestinians. It's not just a contentious topic. It's one that I think Hollywood would rather look the other way for. Honestly, I think that there is a greater chance that when this gets a nomination, there will be a petition raised by some Academy members to revoke the film's nomination than the film winning. If there were to be that type of petition where someone were to try and get the film's nomination revoked, it wouldn't happen. The film would continue to be nominated, and perhaps that publicity could push it forward, get more attention, and get it to a win. And what you're saying, I do agree with. Anyone in the Academy who is on side with the Palestinian cause, which will be a good chunk. It won't be a majority, but it will be a good chunk. If all of them vote for this film, then all you need is other people to be split between films, and then this wins.
I think there is a silent majority, and I think that if they take their job seriously and they actually watch the films, when they watch this film, it's impossible to not feel completely like revolted from what you're watching. This is a film that is a rallying cry that is incredibly effective. There's a lot of films that are depicting or talking about social and political injustices. Few motivate as well as No Other Land.
You could be right that there's a silent majority. I just think back to things like Melissa Barrera losing her agent and being blacklisted over posting pro-Palestinian things. I think of Susan Sarandon also losing management. There's been so many in Hollywood who have spoken out about the genocide in Gaza who have been silenced. And I wonder if some people, even though their votes are anonymous, would be dissuaded from voting for it in the case of it winning.
I stand firm. Maybe it's naive, but I stand firm that if this is nominated, this is winning.
It's getting nominated. I just really doubt that the Academy will be, quote unquote, based enough to do this.
So, given this is such an unpredictable category and you've done a really interestingly structured tier list, what would you have your top five you think will be nominated?
My top five at this moment would be No Other Land, Sugarcane, Daughters, Porcelain War, and Union.
I have the same top four actually, and then I'm taking a risk and I'm taking Hollywood Gate. We always have a shocker, and it's not wise to predict the shock, but I feel like that film kind of fits the bill of like the random Bobby Wine film, and we both I think have only. No, you have four Sundance films in your lineup, which is quite bold.
Yes. To be fair, 2022 did also have four Sundance films, being Fire of Love, Navalny, All That Breathes in a House Made of Splinters. So it's happened.
Okay, I guess we will take a look at the international category now. I just want to quickly say that based on the tier list that I had in the previous video, trying to look at all 90 films that were submitted, take a look at our video if you want to look at a very deep look at all the films that were contending in that category. Since that video, I had seen and taken off La Pata Ladies, and I had replaced it with Dahomey. That would have gotten me 13 out of 15. So not too bad. I think that's usually where I land. We could have a bit of a repeat of what happened in 2020, where we had a bit of a weak year in international, and we had a very clear top, maybe like two or three films. And then we had just like two completely out of left field nominations. This is a category where you can see some surprises as well. And I wouldn't be surprised if the last slot is something that we are really not picturing right now. And it'll only make sense once it will have been nominated. In the F tier, I have three films. The F tier for me are films that I think just do not stand a chance at getting a nomination. I have Dahomey from Senegal, From Ground Zero from Palestine, and Waves from Czechia.
That's really interesting. I can understand your point with Dahomey. From Ground Zero, maybe a little bit less so, although I get missing the documentary shortlist is likely why you have it here.
And just the fact that it's a bunch of short films.
That is also true. It is an anthology of short films. I do take a little bit of issue with Waves. I know that it hasn't had good festival selections. It only played at Karlovy Vary, but I've been seeing exceptionally positive reactions online for it. And I'm starting to wonder if the sort of political weight of the film, the fact that it's about quite a relevant topic, I could see this being a real shocker.
And if this does wind up being like the big surprise on nomination morning, fair enough, it'll have bitten me in the ass. But I've done my research here, and Matt, do not be fooled by that Letterboxd score. The Czech audience can be just as hyped up as the Brazilian audience. From the few people that I've tried to contact and see that I trust that have seen the film, they were not particularly impressed. I think this is a film that worked well enough to get on the short list. Even in the type of film that it is, I think we have films a bit higher on the tier that do that kind of thing, but better. This is not one I anticipate going further from being a surprise on the short list. So next up in the D tier, those are films that have a bit of an outside shot, but currently it's hard for me to see the path. Those films are Armand from Norway, Santosh from the UK, Universal Language from Canada, and Touch from Iceland.
Makes me sad that Universal Language is here because we both love that film. We both think it's exceptional.
What worries me about Universal Language is that the audience reception, one that isn't as cinephile, is not loving this film. Maybe the community of people who watch international feature contenders are really going to go out for this film, but it's not going to be a crowd pleaser.
That's really funny because it did win the audience prize in its category at Cannes.
Yes, that is an audience that goes to Director's Fortnight.
And we do have a litmus test right here on this channel, being Dylan, who does not watch as many art house films as we do, and he thinks Universal Language is awful.
Exactly. If you have to base yourself on one person, you can take Dylan's testimony here. It's already great to see it on the shortlist here. It would take a miracle, I think, for it to be nominated. Armand has apparently incredible performance from Renate Reinsve, and she's having a year, but the film is not quite as well received as it could be. And then Santosh, I mean, I'm taking it again what you were saying, how the film is maybe a little bit too slow, too artsy, etc. That's kind of what I'm getting here. You were inferring, though, that Touch might be bigger than we're giving it credit for.
Touch is an interesting one because it is so sappy, so sentimental. It is really designed to tug at the heartstrings, specifically of older voters. It's a story about an old man who, in 2020, during the outbreak of COVID, heads back to England where he hopes to find and his long lost love. It's the type of movie that you can just picture your parents calling you up and saying, "Have you seen Touch? Oh, it was lovely." But that said, I can understand why it's a little bit lower on the list here because not only has it gotten no precursors, a big question mark for me is, can this coexist with another sappy drama that really tugs at heartstrings and is going to heavily appeal to older voters?
Next up is the C tier. C tier are films that I think are genuine possibilities. It might actually be wise to pick at least one of them. In this tier, I have Kneecap from Ireland, The Girl with the Needle from Denmark, and How to Make Millions Before Grandma Dies from Thailand.
I completely agree with this category. All three of these films have significant strengths and significant weaknesses. Kneecap, which landed a Critics' Choice Award nomination. We have The Girl with the Needle, that landed a Golden Globe nomination. We have How to Make Millions Before Grandma Dies, which has missed all of the precursors. But like I said with Touch, it hits that sappy sentimentality that older voters have shown over and over that they love. This is a film that, if voters see it, it feels undeniable. But without that precursor love, it may struggle to be seen.
I agree. And I think the fact that it made it on the short list is already its biggest asset right now. What it needs is word of mouth. We need to hear buzz the way we heard buzz for Lunana, a Yak in the Classroom 3 years ago, which was a film that gotten zero precursors essentially at this point in time. It was a pure word of mouth hit, crowd pleaser, and How to Make Millions Before Grandma Dies has the ingredients to be that film. Objectively, it is a risk. Kind of like your documentary tier, my tier list doesn't reflect my actual top 5 because I do still have that one in my top 5. I'm willing to take that risk. It has all the right stuff.
It just feels like the type of movie that gets nominated. Meanwhile, The Girl with the Needle and Kneecap, despite the fact that they do have precursors, they don't feel like the type of movies that get nominated. Kneecap is very much the type of movie that every year is a flash in the pan. It comes out in the summer, people talk about it, and because people talk about it in the summer, people carry it onto their lists going forward. Making it at the Critics' Choice Awards is good, but at the same time, there's zero voter overlap between the two of them. It's maybe a little bit too daring of a film, a little bit too risque, a little bit too vulgar to end up getting that nomination in the end. Meanwhile, The Girl with the Needle, while it has performed quite well with critics, I think it's been struggling a little bit with audience scores. It's very dark, it's very depressing. It's not an easy watch in the slightest. While it could be competitive, possibly for nominations at the BAFTA, it just doesn't feel like the type of film that ever gets in at the Oscars.
It could be in certain circumstances. I think right now with the crop of films we have, it's kind of like the perfect snub, you know? In relation to Kneecap, the biggest thing that Kneecap has going for it is that it has already started to get a lot of attention at more, British centered or European award shows. We've had the British Independent Film Awards. This film essentially clean sweeped, and it could mean that we could see some surprise nominations and maybe even wins at the BAFTAs. That might help boost it a little bit to an Oscar nomination. I just don't think that film has the right profile or ultimately will garner enough love for a nomination, which leads me to my B tier. The B tier here is essentially the Janus films. This is where I have Flow and Vermilio. The way I see this tier is pick one of the two. I don't think that Janus will get 2 films in there. If you want to go safe for your predictions, put both Janus films in your top 5, and I think you're guaranteed one of those 2. I don't know whether it's going to be Flow or Vermilio. Right now, I'm leaning Flow. Vermilio, to me, feels like another perfect snub, the way Girl with the Needle feels like a perfect snub.
Flow is one that will benefit a lot from the love that it's going to receive in the animated feature category. Being considered in other categories, there's people talking about it all over the place, will help it. It is also in my top 5 because it has such a high profile.
For the A tier and the S tier, I have the exact same thing that I had in my last video, which is to say Emilia Perez in the S tier. And then I have essentially a tie in A tier between The Seed of the Sacred Fig and I'm Still Here. There really is not one that is higher than the other. To me, they are really on equal grounds. The only way I might put one over the other is if, let's say, The Seed of the Sacred Fig starts to get some screenplay attention. I'm Still Here gets attention in the actress field for Fernanda Torres. Right now, it seems like maybe Torres has a slightly better chance if I'm to bet, but it seems like our top 3 is pretty secure. It would be very, very unusual at this time if any of those three are not nominated. But we have seen some major surprises. I still remember, Decision to Leave seemed like basically a lock, and it didn't wind up getting a nomination. We get some of these surprises once in a while. These films do seem quite powerful, though. So I think, frankly, you should have this top three at the very least, and then do what you want in the last two slots.
Well, you're totally right. Emilia Perez has to be the number one. Unfortunately, it's just the way that this category works, that if it's in Best Picture, if it's getting a Best Picture nomination, it is winning this category. And Emilia Perez is the only thing here that can get a Best Picture nomination. I would give an edge if I had to choose a number two between The Seat of the Sacred Fig and I'm Still Here. It would be The Seat of the Sacred Fig. I see more of an opportunity for that to get BAFTA nominations, and also because it has been really performing well with critics group. I'm Still Here definitely is the number three in the category. Does Fernando Torres become a real thing for the nomination? But it's undeniable this is happening in the international category. It's just a question of, can Torres get it a little bit more? After that, I think I would go Flow, and then I'd go How to Make Millions Before Grandma Dies. So that's going to be my five.
That's exactly my five as well, and I think it works well. It's usually a good thing to have three films that are in the Golden Globes lineup, but that fits perfectly with that. If there's a major surprise, maybe something from the D tier, gets a nomination and takes out whatever would be the fifth slot. But again, this is not a field that is as shakeable as the documentary field.
Yeah, we kind of know that year after year that there's going to be locks in this category, while the documentary category has none. Anyways, that brings us to the end of this video. Let us know what you guys think in the comments down below. What are you predicting to get nominations in these three categories? And of course, Arnaud, I want to thank you as always for coming on to talk about your specialties, to talk about international feature.
I promise for the next video, whenever I'll be back on, for our new Brazilian fans, I will have seen I'm Still Here.
Anyways, thank you so much for watching. As always, my name's Matt.
And my name's Arnaud.
And this has been Fantasy Filmball.